Iran's capital is facing its worst drought in recorded history. The president warns the only option may be to evacuate Tehran. Some commentators called that idea a joke. But water cuts have begun and no rain is expected. How did things get this bad, and how many of the world's cities face a similar fate? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Iran is described as facing water bankruptcy. What started as a slow-burning problem has now turned into a full-blown crisis. Tehran, home to more than 10 million people, could fail to meet the demand for water within weeks. No city has reached that point in recent human history, but some have come close. South Africa's Cape Town narrowly avoided hitting what's known as water day zero back in 2018. Since then, the world's climate has got warmer and drought conditions have got worse. Water shortages are threatening food security, fueling conflict, and already forcing millions of people to leave their homes. So will Tehran need to be evacuated? Is that even possible? And what can be done to address the water crisis there and elsewhere? We'll put those questions to our guests in a minute. First, this report by Imogen Kimber.
Tehran may soon be almost uninhabitable, because it's on the brink of running out of water. President Masoud Pezeshkian says rationing will begin if rain doesn't fall soon.
We've run short of water. If it doesn't rain by the end of November, we must start rationing. But even if we do ration and it still doesn't rain, the citizens must evacuate Tehran.
That's 10 million people. Mismanagement is blamed by many for much of Iran's water shortage, but climate change has made the problem worse. These dams and rivers that usually supply Tehran are dry after a summer of record-breaking temperatures. However, Iran is not alone in facing water shortages that can force people to migrate, disrupt trade and food production, and lead to conflict. The UN predicts 700 million people may be forced to move by 2030 because of water shortages, and millions are already caught in conflicts over water. Mexico and the US have a decades-old agreement which entails Mexico providing water to the US, but it's failing to deliver. Mexico City says it's because it simply doesn't have enough, but others dispute that. Ethiopia constructed a dam to secure its supply in the Nile Basin. That provides water to Sudan and Egypt.
To our brothers downstream in Sudan and Egypt who are worried, Ethiopia built the Renaissance Dam to prosper and to enlighten the region, never to hurt its brothers.
But despite assurances and cooperation agreements, Egypt and Sudan are worried about their primary water source. When floods hit Pakistan this year, it was partly because India released water from its dam on the Indus River. There is a long-standing treaty to share the water. Both countries claim it leaves them vulnerable. And dozens of other conflicts have water at their heart. The expansion of digital technology is worsening the problem, with energy-hungry data centres needing massive cooling systems that consume a lot of water. In Phoenix, Arizona, such centres are blamed for causing drought. As climate change worsens drought and flooding, more voices are calling on governments and corporations to address not only the problem, but the cause. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests, and we're spanning the globe today. First, from Perth in Australia is Peter Newman, a Professor of Sustainability at Curtin University. From Washington, D.C., Marcus King is Director of the Master's Programme for Environment and International Affairs at Georgetown University. And from London, Alam Ahmed is the President of the World Association of Sustainable Development. A warm welcome to you all. Alam, I'll start with you, if I may. We want to focus at first a bit on Tehran. Can Tehran be saved, and how has it got so bad?
Thank you very much. Of course, Tehran can be saved, but it's a massive national effort has to be exerted here. This is not just one reason led to this crisis, but I think there's a lot of reasons. One of them, many people have been warning about this for many years. I think more than 20, 25 years. The European Union issued a report a long time ago, 2000, saying water will be a center for conflict between countries. I mentioned the Middle East. Australia mentioned that in 22/7 to warning their citizens to reduce the amount of water per shower. So it's a long history of warning to these countries. But in the Middle East, unfortunately, some they took it seriously. Now they are making measure. Iran, in one of the countries, unfortunately, did not take it that seriously. So, secondly, the efficiency of the usage of water in Tehran or in Iran and many other Middle Eastern countries is one of the problems. The awareness of the citizen of how to be more efficient and treasure this water is not being the case. Just take the example, I mentioned this in Arab countries in Middle East many times. See the amount of water people use when they just wanted to pray. A lot of water is being used there, efficiency of water. You go to any place, a lot of bottled water. Number three, government policies. Iran is one of them, but among the Arab countries, take Sudan, one of the treasured countries with water policy. No, government is not invested in any really serious measure to make the water available. And number four, Tehran can get used, but it is a major problem because it's a basic economics, supply and demand. The supply is shorter than the demand, and the product we're talking about here is a life-saving product, which is water.
Okay. Peter, what factors do you see are leading to this crisis in Tehran?
Well, I see it as climate change mostly because that's what we lived through in the city I come from, in Perth. We were told there was a climate change drought induced by climate change. And in the year 2001, I was actually working in the Premier's office when it didn't rain at all and the dams ran out. So we got water bankruptcy and we had to act, and we did very quickly, and were able to get around it by getting wind-powered desalination. Fortunately, we're right next to the Indian Ocean, and we were able to get it effectively working. Now only 8% of our water comes from the sky. It is extraordinary that the situation has changed a lot. And this is a city with 2.5 million, so it's not a small city.
All right. Marcus, our other guest there, have touched on the problems and some of the solutions. But first of all, do you think a city of 10 million might actually have to be abandoned at some stage?
Well, perhaps it would have to be abandoned at some stage. But as you noted earlier in the broadcast, there are many other cities who have come close to that, to the day zero, as you mentioned. So Mexico City, for example, is one closer to the United States. We almost reached day zero in Cape Town. But what I think we found is at the last moment, there's been some ingenuity that's been deployed. Maybe water governance has become a little better. Reallocation of resources, bringing water tankers in. You know, I'm confident that in the end, even though climate change has been a real forcer that's brought many countries and many cities to crisis, I'm confident that this can be averted with some good water management policies, and there wouldn't have to be an actual abandonment of such a large city.
OK, so Alan, Marcus suggests there in the last minute some solutions are found, but they do seem to be at the last minute, don't they? I mean, how can cities prepare or prevent such scenarios developing on their own turf?
I think for the case of generally speaking about cities, I think the first thing cities, they have urgently to do some what we call it water audit, to evaluate the amount of water currently in the system in the country and the amount of water is being demanded. And they have to find the gap and to evaluate that gap. And out of that gap, there is all these Arab countries or Middle East, and they have experts in water. They have to find out of that gap in the supply and demand of water, how much of it can be saved or retained back in the system. Because one of the big problems in these countries is water leakages. And you need to look for new innovation, new technologies, and at least you know how much you are missing. And secondly, how urgently I always recommend for Middle East and Arab countries to quickly use education and try to educate the whole public, not just the young generation in school, about be as careful as possible with this water. Not threatening them, but telling them we could be ending up have no water. and try to give them example of the UK, of Australia. Australia struggled from water shortage. United Kingdom here in our country, we struggle. So try to really not alarm the public, but make sure they do come alongside with you. And number three, I think people need to go into contingency plans like Iran now. They have to quickly have, like in the UK, we call it Cobra meeting. Cobra is when there's an emergency. This is an emergency, in my opinion, and the Iranian government should take it as an emergency. Other countries, they need to start. I know some countries have taken serious measurement like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt. I remember Egyptian president threatening even to use, to go into war with Ethiopia if a single drop of water is being. So some countries are taking this very seriously, others are not. And I think government policy need to address this as an emergency, like we call it in the UK, Cobra meeting.
All right, Peter, what lessons can a city like Tehran learn from Australia? You touched on Perth. I mean, it's a much smaller city, of course, than Tehran, but are there things that they can do there that you've learnt in Australia?
Yes, I mentioned the desalination, which is a big thing, but also the recycling of wastewater, treating wastewater and then recycling it back into groundwater so that that recharge occurs. That's another big thing. And then, of course, water-sensitive design being built into planning of any new parts of the city so that there are ways taken of using every bit of water properly, so efficiently. And you can bring the public along with that. There's lots of people who have, I think, developed a lot more trust in government because we went through that crisis time and we all got together and did things. It was we could have evacuated the city. It did get to that point where people were saying Perth should move altogether. But you can, if you work together, bring these solutions in and create a better city because of it.
And Marcus, is education one of those key factors? Iran is one of the cheapest places in the world for water. It's very cheap in Riyadh and Cairo. Do people understand how it's a potentially finite resource?
Yeah, I feel like people do have trouble understanding that. And one of the reasons for that is the subsidization of water by governments within water governance. So I think in terms of education, there's a long way to go. It can be really effective when people see in their daily lives that they are not able to meet their basic needs. So people realize that, but it's very important also for governments to educate people and also to, not privatize water, for example, but be able to use it most effectively by educating people how they can be most efficient with their use of water.
So, Marcus, tell us, help us understand what are the key factors that are leading to water stress these days and what that is exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So water stress refers not only to the lack of volume of water that's available, but it also speaks to the quality of the water itself, also to the timing of the water, which has been essentially affected by climate change more than anything. Climate change has interrupted the timing of monsoons, for example, in Asia. Climate change has created drought conditions where they've been unpredictable, especially in places in the Middle East. It was 140 degrees Fahrenheit over the summer in Iran, and these are just times that have been unprecedented. So to some extent, it's been over withdrawal. It's been population increase, but the wild card and the factor that's really been hardest to predict is climate change and its impact. So I feel like maybe we are at an inflection point because climate has never affected water scarcity quite as much as it does today. And then there's other factors, as I mentioned, like overpopulation, over-extracting of aquifers in areas that can't sustain it.
Alan, you touched on it before, as did Peter, but desalination in this part of the world, in the Gulf, in the Middle East, many countries are almost totally reliant on it. It's becoming common elsewhere as well. How realistic a solution is desalination?
Desalination, yes, is the key components of the water, particularly in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, and others. And one positive note here, I always mention Saudi Arabia as an example. They have built or accumulated a huge experience on water desalination because they have been doing it for many, many years. So it could be a solution, of course, not fully, but partially, by using and reusing the knowledge they have acquired over this many, many years. They know how to desalinate water better than us here in the UK, although the technology is British, American, and so on. But because they used it, I think if they can benefit from the knowledge of desalination, try to cooperate, because it's so expensive to desalinate water. Among them, not just these six, but these six are the ones who are struggling most, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and so on. That's number one. Number two, I think I go back to the point I mentioned earlier. Also, I can see my colleague from Washington also mentioned education. And I think that's quite critical. It will add more because you have a shortage of products. You want to educate the public seriously, not to overuse it. It's already in short. But two things I would like to add them here, if you allow me. Number one, I can see you asked the question a couple of times about would the people in Tehran be able to leave the city? I don't think so. Imagine when they were threatened by Donald Trump to evacuate the city for war, they didn't, they couldn't. It's so unrealistic. So that's definitely one thing. Even if you look to other big cities like Cairo and others. But the final point I would like to make here, which is alarming, we will publish this report next month in London. We've been evaluating all countries in the Middle East and Arab countries about their performance in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 6, which is critical, clean water and sanitation. And I can tell you now, this is the first time I'm going to confirm this, none of the Middle Eastern countries achieved that goal of the United Nations. This is now unofficial, and I can confirm it to you now. None of them, none of the Middle Eastern countries achieved the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 6, which is clean water and sanitation.
All right, well, thanks for that. I mean, first of all, on desalination, Peter, is there a renewable energy solution to reducing the impact of desalination? It is notoriously expensive and energy hungry.
Yes, we did it through a contract with wind power. So the actual process is dependent only on that power. So it is carbon neutral, and the pumping is also taken from wind power. So mind you, our water utility is owned by the government, so they just required that and they did it. But the actual cost of that desalinated water was only about 10 to 15% higher. Most people expected it to be very expensive. For Tehran, it's not on the coast, but I don't know, but the Caspian Sea is not that far away. Perhaps they could bring it there in a pipe or something, but it's certainly a difficult situation. And I would hate to see if the evacuation order was brought in. That would be a global phenomenon that we haven't yet seen. It certainly happened in the past, long past, but I would think the world's commitment to work together on this solution should be brought to bear before any of that happens. And I think there's probably enough expertise around and aid that could be brought to bear to enable that water if it continues to not rain. And that is distinctly on the cards. The climate change is very hard to predict now. Once this is set in, water bankruptcy is on the cards and evacuation is next. So you've got to do something about it now.
All right. Marcus, what are the risks that increased water stress could end up leading to violent conflict in certain parts of the world? We haven't particularly seen it yet, but there is increased water stress.
Yes, exactly. We've been in a paradigm where water stress has been considered a threat multiplier. And what we mean by a threat multiplier is that water stress has exacerbated existing cleavages within societies, be those sectarian cleavages, be that economic cleavages between rich and poor, be that general instability and poor governance within a country. But now what we're seeing is actually a new paradigm where water is becoming a catalyst of conflict itself. And we see this in some areas, especially in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, in the Afghan, Iran, Pakistan corridor. So there's really been this switch of water coming along and aggravating existing underlying tensions to now itself becoming a trigger or a catalyst for new conflicts. And I think we'll see this in about the next 5 years in some of these areas that I mentioned, like the Sahel. But then also what can happen is water stress itself triggers migration. And one of the issues with migration, as you know, is migration to countries that right now have illiberal or protectionist regimes and they don't want to receive the refugees. But as you mentioned earlier, there could be as many as 700,000 refugees related to climate, much of it driven by water scarcity by perhaps the year 2050.
All right, Alan, what do you see? Do you see a risk of violent conflict if water stress increases? One of the believed reasons for the Six-Day War between Israel and its Arab neighbours was access to water, the diversion of the River Jordan. Much more recently, the Indus Treaty between India and Pakistan is hanging by a thread. Is there a risk of violent conflict in the near future?
Yes, 100%. And as I said earlier at the start of the program, the European Union report about the strategy for the future of 2020, at that time was 2000, predicted that water will be one of the conflicting, if you like, trigger between countries. They gave examples. And we have already seen that. And I agree with Professor King just now about with water shortage, you get people start to displace, they have to start work, migration, and so on. We have seen the level of tension between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, even was cited in your first intro program. You look to India and Pakistan, and then you look all across the world, because water is like the shortage of water. This is a fact. All science agree. There is a real cause of this is climate change. All scientists agree, even the White House agreed at some point. But then the major issue is when you find countries like the United States suddenly withdrawing from most of this convention discussion about how to solve the problem, that's a big problem. And I think the world need to come together, at least for water. And also I remember in 1992 when Kofi Annan said, okay, since we are not able to agree on everything about our future, let's agree on that we have initiative. One of them is water. So I think we need to take this very seriously, because we all believe in climate change. Part of the problem is the climate change. We had water shortage in the UK, as I mentioned earlier. It will be a center of conflict, no question. And I think if we see it from that way, from security point of view, I like a title of the strategy by UAE. It's called Water Security Strategy. Security. I think that is good. And also to see Saudi Arabia. I think the approach I have seen, also considering security like Saudi Arabia, they brought together these three ministers together, water, environment, and agriculture. I think that's a good approach. Try to look at water from a security point. It's about security. Because when we say food security, we really mean it. Because without food, you see the conflict in Ukraine now. So I think water is the center between all these. Food, which is agriculture, and the environment. So I think the approach to look to the water, future of your water, from that angle is what I think the way forward to secure your country.
Peter, do you still see that countries recognise that cooperation is more effective than conflict when it comes to water scarcity? Or is there a real risk that soon there will be less of a will to cooperate?
Well, there's some good news you can give on these SDGs. For example, since the year 2000, the number of people with access to clean water has gone from 60% to 75% in 2020. That's a pretty good record, and that can only have happened with cooperation, with aid projects that work, and governments committed to delivering something. We have got some. The number of children dying has halved since 1990. These things are good things that drive us on to say we can solve these problems if we get together and cooperate. What we can't do is try to do it all on our own, because as soon as we say we can get by ourselves, you'll find these climate change will catch up with you pretty quickly.
All right, Marcus, just with you, not to diminish too much the positive note that Peter sounds there, what are the new threats to global water scarcity? I'm thinking the new industrial revolution in data centres, which are popping up all over the world and use enormous amounts of water. What about those and similar issues?
Yes, so one of the issues with data centers, of course, is that they're being constructed in the United States in areas such as Virginia, California, other parts of the United States. And so there probably are water solutions which could be implemented. But what really concerns me about data centers is what happens when they need to be located in other countries, like let's say in Africa. And in fact, some of the suggestions about data centers were that they ought to be adjacent to population centers in South Africa, such as Johannesburg and Cape Town. So countries that are developing AI that are coming further along in that area also happen to have a lot of water risk. And so I see that as an emerging issue and an emerging crisis. And then the other triggers, of course, we've already talked about, is increasing climate change and unpredictability of weather and of water and precipitation.
And Alan, what do you see as the new threats to global water security?
I think I agree with both points mentioned earlier that we're going in the right direction. I think one of the new threats is the following. Most of the old pipes we use are not efficient. And I give you the example of the United Kingdom. Now, the only way to make this water, to reduce the amount of water we lose every year, is by changing these pipes, changing the old system to a new system, more efficient, more advanced by technology and innovation. But that will cost a lot of money. And the water companies, the private sector, keep saying, I can't do this without raising the charges for water. And the general public is already have enough. So the government is trying. So it's quite a big conflict between the private and public sector. I'm always a campaigner of public-private partnership for the SDGs, but this is where a conflict. Number two, I think number two is that we need to realize we are growing up. Population is increasing every year. So the amount of water is decreasing. Climate change is affecting us, but it doesn't seem like the world is realizing we are growing. The number of population is growing up. So really, public policy should really sit down and consider these two factors: growing population, reduction of water, and investment in the private sector in order to solve the problem and improve efficiency in the system.
OK, well, thanks to all our guests, to Peter Newman, to Marcus King and to Alam Ahmed. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.